Welcome to On Texas Football. Time for State of the Program this Wednesday. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel of On Texas Football. Thank you to Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm for his sponsorship each and every Wednesday here. Guys, we got a couple things we want to get on and talk about. Texas, as well as the SEC and Big Ten representatives, were down in New Orleans this week, part of Mardi Gras, I guess, but they weren't really celebrating Mardi Gras as much as they were trying to figure out the future of college football and what that means for the Longhorns. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about Texas's search for a running back coach, as well as, and I wanted to put this to you guys as you think about it as we go on today a little bit, playmakers for 2025. Who are going to be the playmakers in 2025 for the Texas Longhorns? All right, let's get started. Down in New Orleans, Texas brass, as well as Southeastern Conference and Big Ten brass, met this week talking about the future of the SEC play, as well as the college football playoffs. CJ, it looks like right now Texas and the SEC are headed to a 9-game conference schedule starting as soon as 2026. So this is a really quick turnaround. It's going to change Texas's out-of-conference slate because they only got 8 conference games scheduled right now in 2026. But the SEC is looking like they're going to change to 9 conference games to mix it perfectly and shadow what the Big Ten is doing. And that's going to allow for interconference play between those two leagues. What do you make of this SEC going to 9 conference games?
Yeah, I look at it in the sense that there's the SEC and the Big Ten, right? Those right now are the two dominant, conferences in college football. To get on equal and, pretty even standing right now is basically what I would hope to be the case in college football. These are the two conferences that you can easily compare and contrast schedules. You can compare and contrast strength of schedule, their resumes. You couldn't do that when one had 8 and one had 9 conference games. And I think it'll be good for a number of reasons, right? It's a better product on the field on a given week, right? No more are you seeing teams load up a schedule of Maine, Tulane, Houston, and Temple, right? Look at team north of the Red River and ask why you couldn't get a real understanding of how bad your team was earlier in the season. Well, there it is. On top of that, I think it'll help bowl season. Bowl season's been, kind of lost by the wayside because of the college football playoff recently, but look, if you scrape by with 6 wins and 4 of your wins are coming to the teams I just mentioned, you probably weren't deserving of being in a bowl game to begin with. So I think it'll help the product in general. I think it'll help compare and contrast some of these conference rankings when it comes to the playoff as well. Will the ACC follow suit? Look, the Big 12, that's been their model for forever, it feels like. I'm all for it. It's better for the game of football to go give me a game of 2 conference foes. It also sets up for maybe some interconference challenges, the way that you see it in basketball as well. I'm not saying that's a given, but now that you have each team given a set number of Power 4 games, I'm all for it. I think it'll be great for the sport.
Gerry, what do you think, bud?
The SEC caught a lot of grief for their 8 game conference schedule for years.
I was part of that.
And you know what?
Alabama doesn't need to be playing Charleston Southern.
And you know what? And here's the biggest takeaway. They did what they should do to ensure they got 2 teams in the playoff.
Yep.
That they were smart. Now that we're going to 9, the SEC is going to end up with 4 guaranteed spots in the playoff. So yes, you change then and go to 9. Because you're going to get 4 teams in. You're going to get a quarter of your teams in out of the conference. And you'll probably end up with 5 a lot of years when it goes to if it's 16. So they've done the smart things. People that weren't SEC fans didn't like it, but they did the smart thing. But now that they go into 9 is natural if you're going to get 4 locked in spots in the playoff. I think the bigger thing for me is taking away the 1-2 conference championship game and making that your play-in game. Because the one thing I do not I like that's going to come out of this, well, you're playing 9 SEC games. So 1 and 2 are established. They don't need to go play each other to see who's the SEC champion. Those teams deserve the break before the playoffs, because when you go to 16 teams, I think we're going to even have less of a break for the playoffs. There's not going to be the bye.
Yep.
So what you're going to have is you're going to use your conference championship game, so you don't lose money. You're actually going to make more money because you're going to create 2 play-in games. And that's what I like that's coming out of this from an SEC perspective and Big Ten perspective. If you're a fan of the 2 super conferences, they're going to get 4 locked-in bids. So the SEC naturally goes to 9 league games. And then you're going to take away the conference championship game and make it 2 play-in games. That's where this is headed. I think that's a win for college football in the SEC.
I think it is too. Look, and what Jerry's referencing there is, along with the 9 games, there's a proposal out there or thought that the SEC and the Big Ten will both do away with their conference championship games and basically auto-admit their 1 and 2s to the NCAA tournament, what's effectively becoming an NCAA tournament in football. They'll just automatically go in. Then they'll have a play-in game between 3 and 6 and 4 and 5 to determine who the additional 2 teams that get the automatic bids. Let me give you a thought, though, okay? You realize how many teams in the SEC would have been in the college football playoffs had there been a 16-team playoff this year? There would have been 6. 6. Okay? Yeah. So they're only having 4 auto admits sounds great and everything. How many more do you lose by adding that extra SEC game? I don't know. But I can think forward to when Texas plays Notre Dame. I'm just going to put this out there. Texas has a Notre Dame game, I think, in 2030, 2031, something like that. I can't remember right now. But Texas could have 9 SEC games, an interconference game with a Big Ten team, and Notre Dame for 11 of their 12 regular season games. That's a hell of a schedule.
Yeah.
That is a brutal schedule. We'll see how it all runs out. But my thinking here is a lot of things to go. One of the things that I'm very intrigued by is how quickly they're talking about turning this thing around. Usually, like when Texas was going to enter the SEC, it took 2 or 3 years for us to get there, guys, right? They're talking about this taking place in 2026 as soon as next year. So we'll be monitoring that. And I think there'll be some announcements between now and the next couple of weeks about what exactly the SEC wants. I do have one thing I want to ask you. A lot of crowing and crying, frankly, amongst Big 12 and ACC teams right now. Oh, you're killing college football. Now we're just going to evolve into 2 super conferences, and y'all are getting more value out of having 4 teams in, while we only get 2 guaranteed spots. Is that equitable in y'all's opinion? Is that fair? Even looking on being a devil's advocate. CJ, what do you think?
I mean, for years, Texas fans had to hear from the SEC, most draft picks, most all-pros, most pro bowlers, best football on the schedule, and then, hey, they're winning the most championships. And now with Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference, and you look up north and what the Big Ten's doing with their acquisitions as well, that's just how college football is now, until the ACC or the Big 12 shows that they're able to produce that level of talent and that level of consistent play on the field. That's just how it should be. And again, it's different to be on this side of the argument versus where Texas fans were and where I was in the last 3, 4, 5 years before the move to the SEC. But it just makes sense, right? You kind of look at it in a sense of an electoral college in voting, right? You have all the population, you have all the guys that produce big-time college football players. They're going to get more seats at the table when it comes down to it. And I think it just makes sense in that direction.
And I would say this. It's no different than the NCAA basketball tournament, but on a smaller scale. And so for the people, for the Big 12 and ACC fans or the higher-ups that are kind of griping about this, it's no different than the NCAA 68-team tournament. Who gets more bids? The ACC, the SEC, the Big 12. Well, there's 68 teams. And there's 350 teams that play in Division I, 353 or 354 play Division I men's basketball. So it's the same gripe the mid-majors have had about the NCAA tournament for years. If I don't win my conference tournament, I don't get in. It's the same thing. We're at 16 teams instead of 68. And yes, that's the way it's going to be. The Big Ten and the SEC are going to have more worthy teams in the college football playoff tournament than the other conferences are. It's just the way it's going to be. And if people are griping about it, then they should. It's the same thing as the NCAA tournament, just a little different in terms of scale.
I think it's interesting because I frankly, right now, I'm totally fine with it. When it comes to profit sharing, how much is that going to affect whether or not if everybody's got the same amount of money, it's going to come down to who you choose as your players and how you can. Maybe that's when the ACC and Big 12 stand up a little bit more. But right now, I don't see it. I mean, Texas's roster is loaded. Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Ohio State, Penn State. These rosters are loaded compared to the Big 12 and ACC. It's just the way of the world. And I will add this. The ACC and Big 12 in last year's college football playoff, they were 0-3.
Yeah.
So and then let's talk a little bit about how you're being unfairly treated. Maybe that will do it. All right, I want to say thank you. Before we get to talking about the running back coach position as well as playmakers for 2025, I want to thank Adam Lowy, the Lowy Law Firm. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, make sure you give Adam and his group a call. They will give you a free, no strings attached consultation to see whether or not you might be due compensation. Again, that's loweylawfirm.com. Thank you, Adam, and your group for sponsoring On Texas Football. All right, running back coach, CJ and Gerry. We've been following this. Tashard Choice late last week, deciding to go to the Detroit Lions. Right now, we've heard a couple of names that we know have at least talked to folks, whether that's E.J. Bartell at Nebraska, who looks like he's getting an extension at Nebraska. Norval McKenzie out of Georgia Tech, who just offered Javion Osborne, the running back out of Forney, yesterday. Look, the more and more I think about this, the more and more I understand who Steve Sarkisian is a little bit. He takes his time. He wants to make sure he's getting the right guy. He's not necessarily going for the home run hire. He's going for the right fit and what he wants. Gerry, you start.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and CJ and I talked about this on Recruiting Breakdown yesterday, does Tashard Choice, too many people talk about him, I think just in our chats and things, as a running back recruiter. But what he did in Atlanta, in Central and Southwest Corridor of Florida, was huge for the Texas program with the move to the SEC. He was big behind Peyton Kirkland, tag teaming that recruitment with Kyle Flood to get Texas going in Florida, help with Cedric Baxter, and so on and so on. He was working by himself in Atlanta for a while with some fringe help until Kenny Baker was hired. Then Texas had two solid guys in Georgia. So what we talked about yesterday was because Mark Orfe was in I think all this plays into Sark's decisions about this job from a recruiting perspective, because it does matter. Mark Orfe was Rutgers designated Florida and parts of Georgia recruiter. So Greg Schiano thought he could throw him down there and he could compete. That says a lot for Orfe. Now he's wearing the Texas jersey or the Texas shirt. That carries a lot of weight when you go in schools. But the question then is, what happens? Does the running back coaching hire, does Orfe take some of that pressure off recruiting in those areas? Because Texas has offered more guys in Georgia and Florida than ever before in this 26 cycle. Does the running back hire need to have ties in those areas? Because it seems like Texas wants to spend more time and have more foot traffic in Georgia and Florida moving forward. Well, the only way they're going to do that is if they hire somebody that actually already has ties to that area. So that does Orfe relieve some of that pressure, so to speak? That's what's going to be interesting to me about the running back position hire from a recruiting perspective, because Tashard Choice was really key in Georgia and Florida. He recruited more of those guys than he did running backs. He helped Texas get in some doors in those two states that they hadn't been before. So what's Sark thinking along those terms? Because it's evident from January, he wants to recruit more in Georgia than in Florida than ever before.
And I will say this, Texas loses two coaches that had ties to Atlanta. Obviously, and you can go about recruiting that area one of two ways. Tashard Choice was from the Atlanta area, and kind of ended up going to Texas in his He signed with Oklahoma originally out of high school, then ended up going back to Georgia Tech, but he played some of his pro career and coached some in Texas before landing at the University of Texas, but he's a native Georgian. Well, Blake Gideon obviously is a native Texan, played at Texas, but he spent time at Georgia State recruiting.
Yep.
And he had been there in Georgia, and he signed Zealous Hicks out of the state of Georgia. So both coaches for Texas recruited Texas, that Texas lost this offseason, recruited Texas and the state of Georgia. So I think Orfe is a native Texan that recruited Georgia. So now are they going to look for a native Georgian that also can recruit? I mean, but let's go take it away from recruiting a little bit, CJ, and talk about the type of coach Sark seems to be trying to attract. He's not going, and I say this, he's not necessarily going after the big name hire with all these guys.
Right. And a lot of the hires that we've seen so far have kind of originated around development. What have they done to get guys into a higher level of football, or what have they done to get those guys that they've coached into the NFL? Of course, Kenny Baker, Chris Jackson a year ago, their NFL ties played a big role in them being hired by Sarkisian to begin with. Johnny Nance and his ability to bring some defensive twist plus his recruiting prowess out west, that was a big, kind of glowing, kind of star for him in terms of why they wanted to pursue him as a co-defensive coordinator as well. Beyond just territorial recruiting ability, I look at it in the sense that you have to have some sort of energy and ability to relate to these kids as more than just a coach, right? We've talked about it, whether, rosters increase, whether scholarships increase or not, you got to be able to take care of your room. And if they do increase, well, then there's 2, 3, maybe even 5 more kids per room that you got to sit there and say, okay, how can I relate to you? How can we get on the same page and make sure that you're bought in the same way that I've bought into you previously on the recruiting trail? But to Gerry's point, look, on the recruiting trail, essentially, to be able to walk into these schools in which Texas previously did not have a whole lot of connection to, that charisma takes you a long way. You're able to sit there, shake the hands of the coaching staff, leave with a good impression. That allows you to come back and further establish those relationships. Because again, I look forward to this fall where Texas will, look, before we get to the fall, this spring, Texas will be back out on the trail again. Florida, Georgia. Where are they headed this fall? Athens, Gainesville. To walk into either one of those places and leave with a win, that just stamps everything that you had worked for in the spring, this January, going back to last year. That's a big win that you're able to leave those territories with, because you know that those are going to be big recruiting events for Florida and Georgia when big bad Texas comes in and they want to make that a big show, just as Texas did to Georgia this year.
I would add this. I want to add this, Bobby. It's not often the home run hires that a lot of fans bases are looking for are going to be in their 30s and early 40s because they don't have the resume. So that's one of the things I've talked about through answering some questions on DMs is, look, the home run hires, a lot of times, they're guys in their late 40s or 50s who have you can go to a 24/7 coaching page and look at 17 guys they've signed. Well, the Mark Orfe's of the world aren't going to have that resume. But that doesn't mean they can't be a home run hire. Tashard Choice was, 38 when he got to Texas? And he was a little bit more known, obviously, especially to Texas fans because of Dallas Cowboys ties. But Kenny Baker, 38, 39, when Texas hired him, he's not going to have a resume to be a home run hire. Those guys just aren't. So I think that's one of the things that we all have to navigate through is if Texas hired Tony Alford as the running back coach, and I'm not saying they are even considering it, he would be considered a home run hire because people could go to 24/7 and look at 17 running backs he signed, and 8 of them went to the NFL. But Tashard Choice didn't have that resume when he got to Texas as far as signing running backs, but he was a home run hire.
Yeah, I get it. I think there is some of that. You have to have some skins on the wall, so to speak, and that makes people think more highly. I like where y'all are talking about, increasing the energy or keeping the energy high and relatable for young players. And you can be at any age and do that, obviously. But it'll be one that we talk about. I just think that Sark, he's marching to his own beat, and I like where he's taking us right now. So I'm gonna give him that latitude and support him as he tries to figure that out. All right, playmakers for 2025. I wrote a piece for ontexasfootball.com this morning talking about it. Let's go back 3 years, okay? 2022, Sark had Bijan Robinson and Rojo going into the year as his two playmakers. He kind of added Xavier Worthy as the year went on, right? 2024, he had Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell going into it. He kind of added Jatavian Sanders and Jonathan Brooks as the year went on, right? And that's 2023. 2024, he had Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, and he thought Cedric Baxter going in. Well, ends up being Matthew Golden, Jaden Blue, and maybe Gunnar Helm as his kind of prolific guys. Who are the playmakers next year for Texas? And I'm going to put this out there. We didn't really consider Quinn Ewers as a playmaker, right? Is Arch Manning considered more of a playmaker than Quinn Ewers in that category because of what he can do with his feet?
Yes.
Fair?
And yes, and because he throws it vertically. So at a high level. So that's going to allow for more big plays, right? Quinn was more of he was the bend but don't break defensive coordinator playing quarterback. We're going to boom, 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 boom. I'll hit you on the occasional deep ball, right? But that wasn't his strength. Arch Manning is the total opposite. You're going to see more rolls and waggles. That affords for playmaking from a quarterback. And he's going to throw the ball. Him and Sarker, boy, they're going to be, they have thrown deep in 5 plays. Yep, let's do it. I mean, that's the way it's going to be, right? So it's going to afford for more playmaking. So he's got to be the number one playmaker, even though it's his first year starting for this team. I think Ryan Wingo's too. And I think after that, it's to be determined.
I think there's playmaking ability with DeAndre Moore. Again, I think that you put him in the slot, and he was one of your more successful vertical threats this year, even with an Isaiah Bond, even with Ryan Wingo in the lineup at times. He won you some really big key routes out of that slot, whether it be fades, whether it be back shoulders, whether it be corner routes. I know that wasn't a big part of the Texas offense, but hey, a lot of those big plays went to DeAndre Moore, one no more notably than the Mississippi State touchdown right before halftime that came from Arch Manning. So I'm excited to see how he develops and kind of grows his game beyond just the slot.
Yeah.
But yes, it should be Ryan Wingo as the focal point. Who else grows into that? Last year, Bobby, you've mentioned both tight ends kind of grew into that role. Is that a Jordan Washington? Is that a Nick Townsend coming into a specific package? Could you get something from any of the other tight ends in that room right now? But right now, it's kind of an unknown because you haven't seen them run with the ones just yet, what they would look like against the number one opposing defensive line as well. So running back room with the Sarkisian offense, with the way that this veteran, and again, it's not an experienced group all per se, but it is a veteran, it's an older group of offensive linemen. You should still have relative success running the football. Is it more consistent than last year? That would kind of dictate whether or not you get a true return from C.J. Baxter or that next step from a Trey Wisner in my eyes.
And I was going to say Trey Wisner because could he be like Gunnar Helm? Because Gunnar Helm, the more he played, obviously the more comfortable he got, the more experience he had, and the more playmaker he became. Trey Wisner is going to be 212, 215 pounds next year versus 200 this year. And he's being his second year as a featured back because we don't know what's going to happen with C.J. Baxter. Obviously, he'll take on more of a playmaking role next year versus this year's first year playing major snaps at the running back position. Is he going to morph into Gunnar Helm playing running back? It's going to be interesting to see.
I look at it, and you mentioned Trey Wisner, and I immediately think of 33 carries or 36 carries for 168.
Yeah,
that's toting the mail in a big game against A&M like he did. He's certainly going to be one of those guys. The thing I have, and what I'm talking about is a little bit different, though. I'm talking about game changers, like playmakers, guys that. And Trey Wisner made 2 big runs against OU, so I'm not dissing him or anything like that. It's just different because, look. Jaden Blue rode out 70 yards against Clemson. He caught passes out of the backfield on the little wheel routes, right, that were for touchdowns. Those, I think what I'm getting at here is, those sort of scintillating plays where you're just faster than somebody else, where you just can do that Like, who is that guy for Texas? Right now, I really think it's only Ryan Wingo on this team because DeAndre Moore, CJ, you're right. He made a lot of key plays. How many of those were scintillating touchdowns?
It's fair.
Versus maybe the one against Georgia where we made a guy miss in the open field, right? But I'm talking about guys that kind of just do things that make you say, wow, right now. And where's that going to come from? And I don't know that we know yet.
Colin Simmons.
Yeah, it could be on defense. It could
Anthony
be on
Hill.
Yeah, they do that on defense.
Yeah.
Do that on defense. All right, that's going to do it for this week's state of the program. I think that was a good discussion about all of those things. SEC going to 9 games, the running back coach situation, as well as playmakers. Thank you, CJ and Gerry, for joining us. Thank you also to Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. Remember, reach out to Adam and his group if you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, or automobile accident of any kind. For CJ and Gerry, as well as our producer, Matt Hutchinson, you guys have a good Wednesday. We'll be back later tonight with the Longhorn live stream. Hook 'em, guys.